Now let's hear from the opposition. Their voice this morning is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel. Good morning.
Good morning, Trevor.
Your reaction to events overnight?
Well, I think, first of all, America's actions were absolutely essential. We have got to the stage, as we've seen actually in the last 9 days or so, where Iran coming to the negotiation table simply was not happening in any constructive way. We had the IAEA report disclosing the extent to which Iran's capabilities on nuclear were just increasing, and they went beyond civilian capabilities. So these strikes were essential. I think the strikes from both Israel and from the United States, it's quite clear that the American military was the only military capable of literally dropping those bombs on Fordow. And the fact of the matter is, Trevor, I've said this many times, I think many people this morning are saying this as well, Iran is a terrorist state. They sponsor proxies. They harm us for a start. They harm the United Kingdom and our interests, as well as the chance of death to America and their objective, which has always been to eliminate the state of Israel, which is simply not acceptable.
You say that it's essential. Does that mean that you would have given up on diplomacy?
There's no such thing as giving up on diplomacy. You've also heard President Trump overnight basically say that Iran now needs to come back to the table. And if they don't, there'll be additional consequences. So this is a moment where now Iran has to look very deeply at itself in terms of what they do next, clearly. But the reality is, we've also heard President Trump, I think he said this on Friday as well as last night, that the talks that were taking place on Friday in Geneva, they simply were not going anywhere.
It is pretty extreme form of diplomacy to say, we've bombed the hell out of you, we've reduced your capacity to zero, so now come and talk. That's not what's normally meant by diplomacy,
Actually, that's not,
is it?
Trevor. I mean, let's be very clear about the context of this. This has been going on for months and months and months. It was President Trump in the United States of America that actually brought Iran to the negotiating table. I don't want to say negotiating table, but to the talks. There were talks that were underway. And it was while those talks were taking place that Iran basically demonstrated that they were not acting in good faith. We had the IAEA report. We learnt so much more about the capability of Iran. And by the way, it's not just on nuclear, it's also on ballistic missiles. We should recognise that Iran has been supporting Putin in Putin's attacks on Ukraine. We know the range of those ballistic missiles. They would threaten Europe. They're a threat to us. We have state-sponsored activism and terrorism in our own country. We saw an Iranian spy involved in our base in Cyprus yesterday. These are not things that we can just sort of wring our hands over anymore. There has been a long history here. And to the credit of America and President Trump, he has led the way in terms of trying to have diplomatic talks with Iran, and he did forewarn them that there would be consequences if they did not engage.
For viewers who don't follow these things as closely as you or I might, the IAEA is the watchdog, essentially, that verified to what extent Iran was building up military capacity as opposed to civil capacity. But your point that you've just made, which is a point also made to some extent by Jonathan Reynolds this morning, is that there is a risk of terrorism here at home. How serious do you think that is?
So I think it is serious. And I say this as His Majesty's opposition will work with the government, absolutely, because the fact of the matter is politicians in this country and the government of the day must ensure that we are protected. When it comes to protecting our interests at home and abroad, that is a responsibility of the government. Now, we know about Iranian proxies in this country. This is not new news at all. We know our agencies and our counter-terrorism police are all working incredibly hard when it comes to the watch lists, the activisms, all the work that takes place. Look at what happened at Brize Norton just a couple of days ago. Look at our base in Cyprus. Look at the arrests that were made of Iranian operatives approximately now about 6-7 weeks ago. They'll be prosecuted under new terrorism laws that came into force last year. That's why our terrorism laws are always under review. We enhance them. But I think the government will have to think about a couple of things too, if I may.
Sure.
First of all, the threat levels in our country. Are they running the slide rule over that? Are they doing all the due diligence? I think the answer to that will be yes. I guess COBRA will meet later on today. We also have a lot of British nationals, both in Israel and across the Middle East. What are the government's plans? Because I actually wrote to David Lammy a couple of days ago, asked him as of last Monday, what are they doing on repatriations of British nationals from Israel? When we heard last week, on Friday, I think it was, the United States were ready to evacuate something like 25 25,000 US nationals. So what are we doing to
you
ensure that we have greater security of Britain, our equities and our people?
You won't have had a chance to see it, but Jonathan Reynolds said this morning that plans to bring people or afford people the opportunity to come home are in process, and it'll be hours rather than days. But just to come back to the other point you made, would you obviously don't have access to all of the information, but is it your instinct that our threat levels ought to be raised?
So I think at this stage, I can't comment because I've not seen this, and plus the strikes happened overnight. I can't speculate in terms of whether the level should go up. And I do know what the agencies would be doing right now. They'll be absolutely looking at all the threats to us, and they'll be working with our Five Eyes allies and many others. But the point being is that the government will be doing this work if it needs to be raised, and obviously that is something that is a serious moment for us all. And that does also mean that not just the government, but our intelligence agencies, our security agencies will be doing so much more. They work incredibly hard anyway, Trevor. They'll be doing even more to make sure that our people are safe, our equities are safe in the UK. By that I mean our bases and all the key sites, but also within the region too.
Before British assets are deployed in any way, whether directly or in support, do you want Parliament to be consulted, perhaps a vote amongst
Well,
MPs?
I've actually said no, I don't think so, because at this stage, and I was interviewed actually by one of your colleagues, Sophie Ridge, last week on this very point. Things happen very fast. We've seen that overnight with the American strikes. So the government must do everything. We'd back the government when it comes to supporting, making sure that we are protected effectively as a country. Those decisions can come very, very quickly if threats are imminent or things materialise. And, I'm not going to speculate on some of those aspects. We would obviously work in conjunction with the government when it comes to briefings, making sure that the right decisions are being made. We would, of course, use Parliament and all other aspects of scrutiny. This isn't a free pass to actually scrutinise the government on their actions and decisions. And I have to say, we know that we were not involved, I gather we were not involved in the activities last night. If Prime Minister Starmer was called by President Trump, I would have thought one of the obvious questions from there is, what did we offer? Did we offer any support? What was that conversation based upon? Because it wasn't just the bombings last night. We have equities in the region.
Reynolds says we weren't asked. Just very, very quickly, if I may, before we finish. Would you support the prescription of Palestine action?
Absolutely.
Priti Patel, thank you very much for this morning.